Hey guys, it's Serge, and we're back again with another Star Made Quick Tips video. So this video is actually going to be a little bit quicker. We're going to discuss something that I think is very important to the whole design process, and that will be planning. Planning is probably the most important concept that is probably the hardest for a lot of people I know, and especially myself, to grasp. Planning is ultimately going to be the biggest bane of a lot of creative people. And if you're not creative, or at least you don't think that you are, planning can help you essentially harness what you're trying to do and what you're trying to achieve when building something. Now, whether this is something in life or something in StarMade, it's very important to kind of plan what you are trying to achieve. Because if you don't plan something, you will probably end up failing at that thing. Or, if you're very lucky, have some kind of flukish mistake that you're going to have a hard time replicating. So when you're planning something, that will ultimately allow you to, I guess, stick to the road that you set out for yourself. Now, ultimately, there's only so much that you can plan, of course. You can plan to do something, and then something else happens, and obviously that alters the course that you had set out for yourself. But if you don't enter into what you've started to do without some sort of plan in the works, well, then you're sort of just going to have to deal with what you, I guess, go into. It can also be extremely difficult to get motivated, and I am definitely massively guilty of losing motivation. As if you've been watching my videos, you can definitely tell that some of my content has been slipping in the way of how often I am uploading. But it is important that you sort of have some sort of idea in mind of what you want to achieve. Long story short, let's continue talking about StarMade. I mean, I'm not going to try and get philosophical on you, but one thing I do want to talk about is planning. More specifically, planning your ship's builds. And there's going to be a few things you have to think about when you're building a ship, or when you're going to start building a ship, rather. Right here I've got my, it's called the Falchion, but actually this is the Screamer, and this is a ship that I built recently a little while ago, and this is something that I'm quite proud of. It's nothing super incredible, and I built it over the course of a 2-day period that I had my weekend off, and I just didn't really have anything else to do. And planning was ultimately what got me through this. I didn't sit down and on a pen and paper just write down everything that was expected, and I didn't plan it inside and out and draw up blueprints or anything like that. But I did have a core concept of what I wanted to achieve. What I like to do, as you can see over here, is just kind of like mess around. Normally I do this on a pen and paper or in something else. I have a Surface Book which allows me to do this digitally. But one thing that really helps me in the design process is kind of doodling what I want the ship to look like, or station or whatever. Getting some kind of idea, and I don't actually keep any of these. I usually doodle them and I'll delete them or I'll throw them out. But doing this allows you to visualize and cement in your mind what you want the ship to look like. So what we're going to talk about in this video is just kind of the design process that went behind the Falchion here, or specifically the Screamer. And what I wanted to achieve was simple. I wanted a vertical ship, lots of wingy bits. I wanted it to match the Atlas colors, but I wanted it to be adjustable so that obviously I could change the colors if necessary. I could upload it with a bunch of different colors to the dock once I'm finished with it. But I also wanted it to be, I guess, functional. I wanted it to be a warship. I didn't want it to be too weak. but I didn't want it to be too excessively large a job that it took me forever to build. I used a lot of my existing assets, especially in turrets, and a lot of my own designs as far as things that I'm familiar with, and even incorporated some things that I saw some other people did by adding my own little flair, like these little things there. But ultimately, what I wanted to achieve was simple. I wanted a vertical ship. That's step one. I decided on the shape I wanted to work on. The shape is probably the most, I guess, instrumental thing on finishing a build. If you do not pick an appropriate shape for your ship, you're going to end up with some kind of monstrosity that just doesn't have a form. It might just end up at a massive blob, and I'm going to load something in shortly, which is a really good example of that, and something I'm not super proud of, because it took me a very long time to build it. It was a long time ago, back when StarMade was fresh, before even Rails existed. So I'm going to load that in shortly, and I'm just going to give you guys a bit of an idea of some of the things that I used to do, and some of the things that you should learn from my mistakes and not do in the future. So I wanted to kind of keep, we'll go back to talking about the Falchion here, and I wanted to kind of keep a theme happening with some of my ships, and that was this central, I guess, cannon in the front here, which kind of looks like this thing's mouth. So this is a Falchion class vessel, as I've called it. I nickname it the Screamer because it kind of looks like an angry, screaming face. But yeah, so I wanted to keep that. I definitely started with that in mind. I would have started by putting down the, obviously the, placing the core in a place that I knew that I wanted to get to it. And I kept that in mind for interior as well, because I think having an access to the core from your interior is pretty vital. I started laying down a bunch of stuff, and as far as it went, I designed the face first. And that was the idea. I wanted this, as you looked at it from front on, which we're going to look at right now, that it had a very imposing, it had a very nice silhouette from the front. So if you could imagine that as a silhouette, straight on, very nice. But the important thing to remember is you have to consider every angle. So it's obviously going to be a vertical ship, and so I had to consider how it's going to look from the side, how it's going to look from the top and the bottom, and obviously how it's going to look from the back. The front and the back were probably the two most important features that I wanted to put a lot of detail into. And long story short, that's how I planned it. I planned it to make sure that I had thought about these things as they cropped up. If you don't plan about these things, you're gonna find yourself really struggling to accomplish the design that you had in mind in the first place. Now, obviously, there's certain things here that, as I progressively started building the ship, that kind of just were happy mistakes. A bit of Rob Ross for you. That Bob Ross, I call him Rob. I mean, technically it's Rob Ross. Anyway, there was a few happy mistakes I had in there that I just went with, and a good example of that was where are we looking? A good example of this would probably be I'm trying to remember now. Probably down the center here, this part down the center here. It doesn't look like much. It was supposed to actually end up as one big like blade that came down. I didn't like that, so I kind of like canned that idea. There's a few other things that just kind of just led into each other. This back patch here with these missiles on here, they were never intended to be there. It was actually meant to be a lot thinner towards the back there, but as systems started getting added, it obviously became a little bit more bulkier. And just little things like that. I obviously didn't plan every little minute detail, and you're never going to be able to achieve that, guys. You're never going to sit down and plan every little minute detail, because by the time you actually sit down and build the ship, you're going to be so burnt out with the design process that you're just not going to want to do it anymore. At least that's from my opinion. One of the other important things about this ship too was I had to consider what I was going to do for interior. Obviously, there's a lot more systems that I could fill in here. A lot more shields could be added, a lot more thrust, whatever. But we're talking about design here. And one of the important things to consider when you're building is what it's going to look like, obviously overall. So I had to consider where I was going to put the interior, and I wanted interior, so I obviously had that in the top there. I also had to consider little things like where are you going to be able to access the ship, how are you going to get into it, what's the way it's going to dock, how is it going to be able to interact around stations and other ships, how is it going to look in a fleet. There's a lot of little concepts that you have to think about, but you don't have to plan them all at once. The idea is if you can think of an idea off the top of your mind, write it down, put it on a bit of paper, draw it, sketch it, think of a core concept. Think of that plan, what you want to achieve. Now, the adventure of achieving that will spawn the smaller details, the look that it will get. I didn't plan to have the pinstripes like this. I didn't plan to have the wings look exactly like this. I saw the plan, the head there, and I definitely wanted some kind of like bust here, and I definitely wanted it vertical, and I definitely wanted a cannon on the bottom, some kind of like scorpion tail that it can fire from. But everything else sort of just fell into place. It was those small things that you can think of that you stick to. Think of about 5 things. Maybe 10 if you want to be really particular, but 5 things that you want to achieve in your ship, and those should be the things that you stick to. So off the top of my head, the 5 things I wanted to achieve on this ship was simple. I wanted it to be vertical. That's number 1. Number 2, I wanted it to be lots of little wings and fins and little stuff like that. I wanted it to be a bit spiky looking. So number 3 I wanted to achieve is I wanted it to be able to use a bunch of my existing turrets, but since I didn't want it too big, which is number 4, I had to consider how I was going to build it there. And number 5, I wanted to achieve that gun on the bottom. I wanted to make sure that it was an effective cannon, not completely pointless to have it there. But I didn't want it to look too overburdened or big and bulky. I also didn't want it to detract away from the look of the ship. So there's ultimately 5 things I tried to stick to. Everything else fell into place. But those 5 principal, I guess, rules that I set myself upon when building this machine was very important, and I stuck to those as best as I could. In hindsight, I probably could have planned this ship a lot better. I'm very impressed and proud of myself of how this has actually turned out. But like any artist will tell you, it's something you're always going to critique yourself really hard on. And we'll get into that a little bit later, and I'll give you guys a good reason why. Now, you should never be too critical of your work. Now, planning, as important as it is, I'm going to load in a machine that I spent many, many months building. This is going to be a ship that I built a very long time ago and honestly never finished. This was built well before even rails were invented, before there was shield recharges. There was very little understanding I had of the game back then, but I built this purely as a reason to blow off some steam. Where the hell is this thing? Here we go, Harbinger. So I call this one the Harbinger, and it'll load in very shortly. There it is. Okay. Ooh, we got a bit of lag. It's a big ship, by the way. Oh wow, yeah, it's a big ship. Oh no. It's too big. Alright, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna get out of this platform here, and we're gonna just jump straight into the Harbinger. There we go. Alrighty, let's let this thing load in. So this thing's massive. This thing is like 500 meters long, or 441 long, 200 wide by nearly 300 wide by nearly 250 tall. Now this, although looks impressive, I guess, on the surface, in a moment I'm going to show you why I'm not super proud of this. And this is obviously well before I actually started planning my ships, and really actually knew a lot about the whole design side of StarMade. I built this without ever playing on a server, without considering what it would take to actually build. Just purely built it for a bit of fun. And I might even make a video from the Vaults video bringing this guy to the surface and actually giving you guys a tour through it. Because it's not technically complete, but it's complete enough. I'm never going to go back and finish it. I might do a redo later. I doubt it. Anyway, this is the Harbinger, guys. So let me just turn off that HUD again. This thing's pretty monstrous. It's made almost entirely out of hardened hull, which is something that I didn't really consider when I was building it. It's pretty monstrous. It's a pretty big monstrosity. Now, you can already see some issues with this. The first thing, like I've always said, is that palette. So yes, technically it has a primary and secondary color, the black and the gray, with the blue accents and the blue lights. But it's a pretty simple palette, especially for such a big ship. But really what I want to point out here is a bit of self-deprecation here, but it's the fact that this thing never had any plan. I just sort of come home every day after work and just started working on another thing and just added another thing to it and just didn't stop. I didn't keep a theme, I didn't keep a pattern, I didn't keep a plan in mind, and so it kind of came together as this just big mess. And although it looks okay from a distance, it's like one of those paintings where from a distance it looks okay until you get up close and notice all the minor issues with it. So this was built obviously a very long time ago. You'll notice all these turrets are floating because they're not connected to rails. There aren't any rails in this ship at all. I don't even know if the thing actually functions at all anymore, but I'm not going to take you for a full guided tour. I just want to point out a few things. So I had this bit of an idea here, and there's some cool stuff. I like certain things like these chains here. I really like how those turned out. But there's just little things like, and hopefully you can see them as I'm flying around, there's lots of little amateur, like I did something here where I wasn't quite sure. Actually, here's a really good example. I did this ribbing here, but I wasn't quite sure the pattern I wanted to go with, so I kept changing it. Instead of kind of picking the best one and sticking to it, I kind of just kept adding other things. Like I took lines out here because I thought it added a bit of extra detail. The tarts are very basic looking. This entire top half here is just completely bland and boring. I have another version of this where I actually have like hangers and stuff along the top, and that's even more of a cluster. What else have we got here? This side wall here, it's just, there was a lot of planning. There was practically no planning and a lot of just, oh, I think this looks good. Oh, I'm going to add this, and I'm going to add one of those. And, ooh, that sounds like a cool idea. Like this here. This is some sort of, I don't know, it's a support structure. I can't remember. It doesn't give a very, I don't know. It's hard to look back at your old stuff, guys. And I guess the biggest reason I'm bringing this to our attention is the fact that I don't want you guys to think that your ships are looking terrible or that your designs are just never going to get anywhere. Because honestly, this is something I built a long time ago. See, I tried this chain thing here again, and honestly, it works okay if you just look at this. But then if you zoom back out, you kind of think, oh, okay, that's looks a bit weird there. If you just take a look back at your older stuff, and I want everyone to do that. I want everyone to just, if you're getting a bit, I guess, down about how your ships are looking and what you're starting to do and how you're achieving what they look like, I want you to go back and look at some of your older builds. And this is by far my oldest build, but this is by far not my oldest build. I've got much older builds than this, but this is just a good example of something that I did a long time ago, and I hope personally, and I hope you guys agree with me, that I've improved a lot since I did this thing. And part and parcel of that has me sitting down going, okay, what am I doing wrong here? And the biggest thing I was doing wrong was I wasn't planning. I was putting all of my effort into one pointless task. And that was this monstrous ship that just, it didn't look good, has a lot of empty spaces, a lot of stuff that just looks very bland. I mean, this thing has no shape. It's just a big block. It's a big blob of mess. I tried to make certain things interesting, and there are some interesting things that I still really like today, but there's just not a lot of structure. And I think that's probably the biggest difference between where I am now. As you can see, let me just get back here. So where I am now, here, versus where I was. And it's important to realize your roots, definitely, to see where you've come from and how far you've gone. But it's also important to realize that if you attempt to sit and do anything, be it a tiny little fighter or a massive capital ship, planning is probably the most important thing you can do before you start. Having those rules, those I want to achieve this, I want to see this happen, and following through with those, you will ultimately find yourself creating something a lot better looking, a lot more than what you'd originally had intended. Because sticking to those rules, you'll find yourself, the rest will fall into place. You will sit there and you'll go, okay, I wanted to achieve a vertical ship, and I think I achieved that for sure. No doubt about it. But did I achieve everything I wanted to set out for? In my case, with the Falchion, that is true. I believe I achieved everything I wanted to with the Falchion. I had a very set purpose in mind. It was to be a, I guess, flagship for small fleets, and a personal kind of get-around vehicle with not a ton of interior, but enough to get your little bit of roleplay in there, but also be an effective ship. This, I had no idea what I wanted to achieve. All I knew is I wanted a big ship, a big powerful ship that could just destroy worlds or whatever. And although I, made a big ship, a big powerful ship, I don't know, I just got carried away. I didn't stop and think, how is this going to look when I'm done? There's so many different things added to this. There's no structure, there's no form. Anyway, guys, I've rattled on along enough. What I'm trying to say ultimately with this video is that I think it's very important that you stop before you start. You need to take a second to just think about what you're going to achieve with your ship. What kind of ship do you want to build? Ask yourself those questions. What are 5 things I want to do when I build a ship? And make sure that you sort of stick with that. Start with a little drawing or sketch or some kind of way to think about how you're going to build something. Work your way into making sure you achieve the base design of what you wanted to do, and don't let yourself get carried away. Don't let yourself just keep adding stuff for no particular reason. Every time you decide to make a change, ask yourself, okay, is this going to achieve what I wanted to achieve? Is this going to make this look better? Is this going to change the overall shape? Because if you don't, you're gonna end up with a mess. And although the mess might look impressive, you spend a little bit of time looking at that mess and you realize it is just a mess. Anyway, guys, I've been going for much longer than I anticipated. This is gonna be a little bit longer video. I got very philosophical with you all. I do apologize. And I should upload this guy pretty soon. Let me know in the comments below what you'd like to see me do some quick tips on. This is obviously not a quick tip. It's a 20-minute video. I don't know what I'll call this. Maybe this is just some kind of like motivational thing. I'm in a bit of a rut, so I want to keep myself motivated. But if you guys can think of anything you'd like me to tell you about, teach you about, if you'd like to even give me some of your own opinions on things that you reckon work really well in your builds, please leave those in the comments below. And leave a like if you liked this video. Leave a dislike if you disliked it, because yeah, that's an option. And if you do have any questions on this particular video or videos like it, again, in the comments below. Now, if you just swung by and you haven't seen my videos before, but you particularly like them, don't forget to subscribe. And if you haven't already subscribed and you've been watching my videos, what the hell are you doing? Subscribe, you lazy bastard. Anyway, guys, this has been Serge with a video. We're gonna call it a video, guys. Catch you later.